Pavlina clawed desperately at the snow, trying to haul Andre up, but he kept slipping deeper. Rocks and jagged branches tumbled down, scraping his face. She screamed, yanking his arm with all her strength, but they were utterly alone, trapped in an icy nightmare with no escape. They had made a critical mistake, underestimating the Routeburn Track in New Zealand. What should have been an easy hike turned into a fight for survival. But what exactly went wrong? Viewer discretion is advised. On July 25, 2016, Czech travelers, Pavlina Pajzova and Andrej Peter, arrived on New Zealand's South Island, eager to explore on tourist visas. Captivated by the country's beauty, they set off on the famous Routeburn Track, known for its breathtaking views. The Routeburn Track stretches 32 kilometers, winding through Mount Aspiring and Fiordland National Parks. Along the trail, there are 3 huts where hikers can rest: Routeburn Flats, Routeburn Falls, and Lake Mackenzie. The Department of Conservation states that most people complete the track in 2 to 4 days. Outside the main hiking season, from May to late October, the trail becomes extremely challenging due to severe weather. Strong winds, freezing temperatures, heavy rain, and sudden snowfalls make it a serious risk. Snow can bury parts of the track entirely, obscuring markers and making navigation perilous. During the warmer season, from November to April, the Routeburn is more accessible. But even then, hikers must remain prepared for sudden weather shifts. That year, extreme cold was expected once more. Andre and Pavlina were explicitly warned at the Department of Conservation office. Weather conditions were worsening, and the trail's safety was highly uncertain. But the couple refused to change their plans and kept going. Big mistake. Another group had already learned the hard way what happens when you ignore the weather, and they paid the price. About 30 years earlier, a group of hikers from the Southland Club was staying in a cabin near Lake Mackenzie. That evening, they noticed 2 lights flickering high up on a slope near Ocean Peak. At first, they assumed it was just other hikers making their way to the cabin, but then the lights started drifting apart in different directions. That was strange. Leaving the trail in that area was risky. One wrong step and you could end up in a ravine or buried under an avalanche. Soon, they came across the first hiker, a young man named Alex Kolmetz. He was drained, shivering, barely holding himself up, but still moving. He and his friend had lost their way. The group wrapped him in warm clothes, brought him to safety, and went looking for the girl. They spotted Nicole Meisner a little farther up, and she was in even worse shape. Her words were jumbled, and shockingly, she was missing a boot but hadn't even noticed. That's how severe her hypothermia was. They carried her back to the cabin, gave both of them warm food and drinks, then tucked Nicole into 2 sleeping bags and lay beside her to warm her up. Later, Alex and Nicole admitted they had completely underestimated the hike. They showed up in jeans and cotton sweaters with no proper hiking boots. On top of that, they totally misjudged how long the hike would take. If no one had found them, they likely wouldn't have survived the night. And the scariest part, the forecast didn't even warn about heavy snow that day. By 2016, the weather forecasting was more accurate than ever. Pavlina and Andre had no excuse for ignoring the warnings. Yet they parked their camper at the trailhead and spent the night inside, determined not to postpone their hike. The next morning, they set off toward Falls Hut, planning to reach it by the end of the day. Before setting off, they were supposed to log their route in the visitor's register, a standard safety measure that helps rescue teams track hikers. But they skipped it, just to avoid paying for an overnight stay at the hut, a choice that would come at a steep price. The next morning, July 27th, at around 10 a.m., Paulina and Andre set off again, carrying only light backpacks. They had no proper gear, no tents, no extra layers. They thought they had everything they needed, just some snacks, water, and flashlights. Their plan was to cross Harris Saddle and make it to Lake Mackenzie, where they intended to spend the night. At first, only a light snowfall began, nothing to worry about, but something much worse was on the way. They should have turned back. July 27th. By 3 p.m., Pavlina and Andre reached Harris Saddle, completing the first stretch of their route. But instead of the expected 2 hours, it had taken them nearly 5. The deep snow had slowed them down. They were freezing, especially Andre, who was shivering uncontrollably. Their clothing was fine for an ordinary hike, but nowhere near sufficient for the brutal conditions they now faced. Pavlina wore a synthetic jacket, a few layers underneath, and hiking boots. Andre had an insulated down jacket and pants. But it was far from enough. The light snowfall quickly escalated into a full-blown storm. In these conditions, they needed more layers of thermal protection and outerwear that could shield them from the wind. Instead, the icy wind tore through their clothes, stripping away what little warmth remained. At last, Lake Mackenzie came into view in the distance. Pavlina checked the map and tried to reassure Andre just a little farther and they'd be safe. But with every passing minute, the weather grew worse. By 5 p.m., darkness had completely swallowed the trail. Even with their flashlights, they could barely make out the ground beneath their feet. By 8 p.m., the couple had completely lost their sense of direction. At one point, they spotted their own footprints, nearly buried under the fresh snow. That's when it hit them. They had been walking in circles. The lake, which had seemed so close just hours earlier, was now nowhere in sight. Pavlina and Andre had no idea which way to go. By midnight, Pavlina spotted a rock formation that could provide shelter. With no other options, they decided to stay there for the night. They unrolled their sleeping bags, only to find them completely soaked. With no other choice, they crawled in anyway, hoping to stay warm. Pavlina couldn't sleep. The same terrifying thoughts raced through her mind. What if the snow buries us alive? What if we fall asleep and never wake up? July 28th. Somehow, they made it through the night. By morning, the weather had cleared slightly, and Mackenzie Hut finally seemed within reach. They skipped breakfast. Getting to shelter was their only priority. But the snow had buried the trail. With every step, they sank deep into the snow. Moving forward was a struggle. By midday, Pavlina sensed something was wrong. Andre started taking off his clothes. He was frustrated, saying his pants were making it hard to walk, and that his jacket felt too heavy. Pavlina forced him to put everything back on, but something was seriously wrong. His skin was turning bluish, and he wasn't thinking straight. He started chewing on branches, mumbling nonsense. It was a clear sign of severe hypothermia. When a freezing person starts removing their clothes, it's called paradoxical undressing. Their body loses control of temperature regulation, making them feel hot, even though they're actually freezing to death. His bluish skin meant his blood circulation was failing, and the slurred speech and strange behavior, that meant the cold had already started shutting down his brain. Pavlina realized Andre was no longer fully aware of what was happening. She had to act fast. She sat him down under a rock before rushing to find the trail. She ran up and down through the snow, searching desperately. Then it started snowing again. Within minutes, fresh snow had erased any visible paths. When she returned, she was horrified. Andre had removed his down jacket and swapped it for a much thinner one. His voice was barely a whisper. He could hardly speak. Pavlina dragged him to his feet, forcing him to keep moving, pushing him not to give up. But as evening approached, the weather took another turn for the worse. They knew heading toward Lake Mackenzie was too risky. Instead, they turned back. They attempted a shortcut but made a terrible mistake. Instead of descending, they unknowingly began climbing higher. Andre was getting worse by the minute. Pavlina left him again and pushed ahead, hoping to get a better look at the terrain. She spotted the ridge summit ahead. She was convinced that if she could reach the top, she'd finally get a clear view of the surroundings and find the right path. But when she reached the top, her heart sank. All she saw was an endless expanse of white. She turned back toward Andre, and just as they started moving again, disaster struck. Their feet slipped, and before they could react, the ground beneath them gave way. They plunged into a hidden ravine, concealed beneath thick layers of snow. Trees and bushes lined the ravine, breaking their fall, but Andre was trapped. He had landed between two trees, tangled in a web of branches. Pavlina scrambled to pull him out, but every move she made caused the branches to crack beneath him. If they snapped, he would plunge even deeper. She sat there, frozen, not from the cold, but from the horrifying realization that she could do nothing. There was no one around, no way to call for help. If they had even the most basic gear, a rope, stakes, anything, she might have found a way to pull him out safely, but they had nothing. All she could do was sit beside him, listening to his breathing. It was slow, labored, and then it stopped. That night, Pavlina stayed by Andre's body, trapped in the cold and in her own despair, struggling to comprehend how everything had gone so terribly wrong. July 29th. Pavlina forced herself to keep going. She grabbed a few of Andre's belongings from his backpack and draped his black jacket over the bushes, hoping to mark the spot so she could return for him later. Then she kept moving. During the fall, she had lost her backpack, along with all her supplies. Now she had to climb back up the steep slope to where they had slipped. It was exhausting, but she had no other choice. By some miracle, she found her backpack. She took a quick break, eating whatever little food she had left, trying to think of a plan. But the thick fog had rolled in again, making it impossible to see any landmarks. Her hands were completely numb, her gloves lost somewhere along the way. Pavlina knew she wouldn't make it to the hut before nightfall. She had to find shelter. She huddled among the rocks and waited for morning. July 30th. At sunrise, Pavlina shot up. The fog had finally cleared. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could finally see the landscape around her. And then, pure relief. Far in the distance, she spotted it, Mackenzie Hut. Hope surged through her, but the journey was still brutal. The deep snow made every step a struggle. At one point, she lost her footing and slid down a slope, straight into an icy lake. The icy water soaked her to the bone. Now, the cold was unbearable. The wind cut straight through her wet clothes, stealing what little warmth she had left. But she didn't stop. By midday, she reached the hut at last. She threw open the door, desperate to find someone, anyone. But inside, just 50 empty beds. No one else had dared to hike in this weather. She was completely alone. There was nothing useful, nothing that could help her survive. Then her eyes landed on a locked door, the caretaker's room. Without hesitation, she smashed the window and climbed inside. Inside, she found a gas stove, some food, and even a radio. Pavlina hurried to turn it on. She hoped to hear some kind of news, anything to tell her that a search team was looking for her. But no matter how hard she tried, it was no use. The instructions were in English, and since she didn't speak the language, she couldn't figure out how to use it. But the worst part, it wasn't just that she couldn't hear a message meant for her, she couldn't send one out. Pavlina had no means of communication. She hadn't brought a radio or any device capable of picking up a signal in the mountains. She made a decision not to risk finding her way back alone. It seemed safer to stay put and wait for rescue. Besides, her body was barely holding up. Her legs ached from the fall, and her cuts and scrapes weren't healing properly. After spending a few days in the hut, regaining some strength, she changed her mind. She was desperate to get out. Pavlina even made her own snowshoes out of old crates and hiking poles. But each time she tried to leave, avalanches blocked her path. She was forced to turn back again and again. A week passed, then another, then a third, and still no one came. She rationed her food, wrote in her journal, and did everything she could to get noticed. At one point, she even drew the letter H in the snow, hoping someone in a helicopter might see it. That is, if a helicopter ever came at all. Days turned into weeks. Her food was almost gone, but she refused to give up. At first, Pavlina and Andrei's families didn't suspect anything was wrong. The couple hadn't mentioned any plans to go hiking in New Zealand. But as the days passed and no one heard from them, worry started to set in. Back in the Czech Republic, Pavlina's family took to social media, hoping for any clues. Their concerned posts on Facebook quickly spread. Eventually, one of their posts reached the honorary consul of the Czech Republic in New Zealand. He acted fast, contacting the police and the Department of Conservation. A full-scale search was about to begin. On August 24th, exactly 30 days after the couple set out on their trek, rescuers finally found Pavlina and Andrei's car parked at the Routeburn shelter trailhead. This was their starting point. From there, the search team began combing the trail, trying to determine which path they had taken. Had they signed the guest books, registered with the Department of Conservation, and paid for overnight hut stays, tracking them down would have been much easier. Search teams spread out across the area, while a rescue helicopter took to the sky, scanning the surroundings near Lake Mackenzie. Then, suddenly, they spotted something. From the air, rescuers saw a large letter drawn in the snow, and right in front of a hut, a woman was waving her arms. It was Pavlina. She was weak, exhausted, but alive. Constable Andrew, one of the rescuers, recognized her immediately. The team landed and rushed to her. Pavlina was in bad shape, physically drained, emotionally shattered, and suffering from frostbitten hands. She had been alone in that hut for 25 days. But even then, her thoughts weren't just about herself. She pleaded with the rescuers to recover Andrei's body for a proper burial. Pavlina was airlifted to the nearest hospital, while the search continued. It took 2 more days to find Andrei's body and return him to his family. After returning to the Czech Republic, Pavlína showed her gratitude with a generous donation to the Department of Conservation and Landsar, the organization that saved her life. While the exact amount wasn't disclosed, it was reported to be a 4-figure sum. She called the people who saved her heroes. Unfortunately, little is known about her life today. But one thing is certain, an experience like this stays with you forever. What would you do differently to stay safe in a situation like this? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. There are plenty more stories here with valuable lessons from other people's mistakes.